I think you are live. I think we are alive and now live on YouTube, Jerry, for an Ask Me Anything. Hey, welcome in. I'm so glad you're here. Obviously, this is Jerry Jenkins on your screen. I'm your host, David Loy, and it says Jerry in the bottom of my screen, but that's part of the technical difficulties we were facing a minute ago, Jerry. And so we're overcoming those things. Welcome in. I'm glad that you're here today. Are you doing all right today?
I'm doing fine. I feel like anytime it's technical problems, it's my fault. But because my first computer ran on coal, so
Wow. Well, it seems to be working now. Fingers crossed that things are actually working. Hey, if you're here with us, first of all, welcome in. Second of all, thanks for your patience. Third, if you know of anybody else who was wanting to join this, they might have joined a separate live event that didn't end up happening. So just let them know that we're over here. Tell them to come jump in. I see so many names, Jerry. I don't know if you're seeing this, but a lot of people are jumping in saying hello. Is that showing up on your screen at all?
it's not, and I'd love it to if I could do that.
There should be a chat uh, tab on near the top right. If you want to click that little bubble, you might
There
start
it
seeing
is.
some of the chat. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
um, welcome in. Hey, if you're here on YouTube, you know what an AMA is. You've probably seen and been a part of a lot of them. And there's nobody better in the writing world to give some expertise and perspective on the topics of writing than Jerry Jenkins. And so, Jerry, are you open to taking any question on writing that might come in today?
I'm very much open, and I'll be here as long as people have questions. So I think we owe them at least that.
Excellent. Well, hey, I want to ask a couple people who might be watching right now. If you're on our team behind the scenes, if you want to jump over to that other channel and tell folks to come join us over here, that would help out a lot. But while you're doing that, hey, if you're here with us right now, type your questions into the chat because I'm going to pick out some questions. We're going to get Jerry's thoughts on your writing issues. And again, like I said, nobody better qualified to give some answers and perspective on writing than Jerry Jenkins. Jerry, you won't do this, so let me take just a minute to talk about you as people are jumping in and joining us. If you haven't heard of Jerry before, let me tell you that he's written over 200 books in his career. That's right. I said over 200 published books that Jerry has written, well over 73 million copies that those books have sold. And he's still an active author, writing multiple titles each year. And in terms of teaching the craft of writing, there's nobody better. If you've ever Googled how to write a book, how to write a novel, anything in that vein, Jerry is usually the one that pops up first. And that's because he has the experience and the credentials to be able to speak into those issues. So, Jerry, let's jump into a couple of questions. Here's one from Abhishek right now. Abhishek joins us. Thanks for being here. He says, Sir, can you please recommend some platforms for writing novels? Jerry, give us an overview of what your novel writing process looks like.
I guess I'm curious about what you mean, Abhishek, by platform for writing novels. If you're talking about software, there are some software programs that try to walk you through that. I don't use those. I do use Scrivener for my research because it's such a handy tool for um, gathering research and categorizing it, putting it in order, that type of thing. I found that Scrivener is probably better for people who want to self-publish, and it helps them format their final manuscript in such a way that it can be put on Amazon, or it can be sent to a self-publishing house to be printed. Of course, I don't self-publish as a rule. Almost all my books are published by traditional publishers where they pay you rather than the other way around. So I send them a manuscript, and the whole publishing business works on Word. So I write my manuscripts in Word and transmit those to the publisher, and then they do their edits and working back and forth with me, and then they do the formatting, et cetera, to actually publish the finished product.
Abhishek, that's a great question for us to kick off. Thanks for being here. If you're just joining us, it's an AMA with Jerry Jenkins. We got started a little bit late. A lot of you are sitting there saying, yes, I know, I was waiting, but thanks for your patience. We're up and running now. Jerry, here's a question that came in from Leo, and I know you hear this a lot. And before I ask that, real quick, Clint O'Reilly, you said, is this live? Yes, it is live. It's finally live. Leo, here's your question. I struggle with confidence. How do I know if I'm good enough? Jerry, that's common. So what do you say to somebody in Leo's situation?
Yeah, you're not alone, Leo. That is the most common question I hear and complaint I hear from wannabe writers. The fact is, I know almost everybody in the business. I've published with more than 50 publishers. I know the guys that are the household names, the best-selling guys, and women. Everybody feels the same way, including us. Even those of us who've had lots of visibility, lots of sales, lots of success, we still face that confidence issue every day. And I have a rather revolutionary approach to that. What that really is writer's fear. You fear you don't know enough. You fear you're not good enough. You have a fear of editors, maybe, or critiquers, the whole publishing process. Um, I have those same fears every time I start a new book, even though I've done this so many times and know I can do it. I worry, am I still good enough? Do I still have it? Will I be rejected? Whoever told me I thought I could do this? I get halfway through a book and wonder, why I ever thought I could finish. And I have to look on the shelf and see all my titles and say, you have done this, you can do this. So what I do, rather than try to win over that fear or avoid that fear, I embrace that fear. Now, that sounds crazy. It sounds counterintuitive because so many motivational speakers or even writing coaches will say you have to overcome your fear. I have legitimate reasons to fear. I may not be good enough. The competition is too great. The market is glutted. Who needs another book on any subject? And so I embrace that fear and say, my fears are legitimate. Now, does that make me quit? No, I'm a writer. I'm not quitting. That's not even on the table. But I'm afraid. And so I say, all right, I have a reason to be afraid, which motivates me to do my absolute best work every time. If I'm not good enough, the market will tell me, the publishers or the agents will tell me, and that'll be the end of it. But if I do have a chance to publish and continue to publish, I need to do my absolute best work because I have a reason to be afraid. And I'm competing in a really thick market. And that's where success comes from, is when you've embraced your fear, you channel it into motivation to do your absolute best work. And it's doing that best work that will show you what kind of a writer you are. And if you've got a chance for success, that's the way to get there.
Leo, that's a great question. And again, common. So thank you for bringing it to the table. A lot of folks who are here with us right now, I'm sure, saw some benefit in Jerry's answer there. So thanks for bringing it up. Jerry, you said you'd answer a bunch of questions. I'm glad you said that because there are a lot of questions coming in. So let's keep going. Cooper, thanks for being a part of this live session. Cooper says, Jerry, do publishers or agents ever turn away writers because they're too young?
No, they don't. I have never seen an agent or an editor look up from a manuscript and say, how old is this person anyway? Now, if it comes out, I mean, the whole point is good writing and having a platform. Sad but true, you need to have a following. You need to have a social media presence and bring to an agent or a publisher a tribe who might be the first people in line to buy your book. But it's the writing that makes the difference. And they don't care how old you are. They don't care if you're 15 or if you're 95. But if you're 15, there may be some limitation in how much traveling you could do. But of course, nowadays with the social media and the internet and all that, we've learned to do a lot of this promotion online. And so you can do it from your home. You may not have to travel. If you're elderly and can't travel, that could be an issue. If they'd love to have you interviewed in person on one of the morning shows or the Tonight Show, something like that, if your book does well, that's the only time that becomes an issue. Other than that, they don't care how old you are if you can tell a story and it's well told.
Great question, Cooper. Thanks for being here. Glad you're a part of this live event. Over 100 people now here in the room with us, Jerry. So welcome to everybody. It's been climbing up steadily since we got started. So if you're just joining us, writing questions for Jerry Jenkins. So type away in the chat box and we'll continue answering some questions here. Here's one from Fiona. Jerry, Fiona says, how do you know if you are a pantser or a planner?
You'll know pretty soon. I'll tell you how I learned that I was a pantser, writing by the seat of my pants instead of being a plotter or an outliner or a planner, as you say. I know the feeling of security that outlining gives a novelist. They know where they're going. They know what they're trying to accomplish and how this is going to happen and what the sequence is. But I find when I start outlining, I get really antsy to write. It's like I don't need to interview. A lot of people do these fictitious interviews with their characters, and those who are outliners, that's great. If it works for you, that's what you want to do. You want to do what works for you. About half of all novelists are outliners, and the other half of us are pantsers. Stephen King happens to be king of the pantsers, no pun intended. He's the one who says, put interesting characters in difficult situations and write to find out what happens. So you're writing as a process of discovery. But I find the way I knew I was a pantser was because I didn't have the patience to outline the whole story. Sure, I have a character or two in mind. I have a problem in mind. I have an idea where I'm going, where I'd like to end up. But I don't sketch that all out and try to say, and then this happens, and then that happens, and then that happens. I just want to write. And as I write, those characters reveal themselves to me. I tend to be an intuitive plotter, apparently, because I don't write it down. But as I'm writing, I might write something on page 40 that mentions that my protagonist in whatever scene I'm writing at that time was wearing a red shirt. And I might wonder, why did I say that? I don't even know. What's the importance of that? I may have to go back later and take that out because it's meaningless. But then 200 pages later, I find out that somebody saw him doing something or told on him or somebody saw it on a closed circuit television camera, something like that. And the fact that the color of his shirt made a difference. That's subconscious, intuitive plotting or planning. And it probably comes from being raised on television and movies and that type of thing. Some people just don't have that knack, and they need to plot all that out in advance. Now, you can determine whether you're an outliner if you try to just sit down and say, okay, I've got this character, I've got an idea, I'm going to open the book and start the story. And then you hit a brick wall about 30 pages in and have nowhere to go. If you're a pantser, you do have a place to go because you can just simply say to your character, where are we going now? And they'll tell you. If you're an outliner, you're stuck because you haven't outlined anything. Now, it's interesting that outliners and planners are sort of like people with curly hair versus straight hair. You ever notice this? People with curly hair are always trying to straighten it. People with straight hair are always trying to curl it. When I'm writing as a pantser, I sometimes wish I was an outliner. I'm halfway through the book and I'm saying, boy, I wish I had my sequence all mapped out here so I could just keep going, but I'm going to have to think this through and ask my characters, where are we going now? What are you going to say next? And I've talked to outliners who say the same. They're following their outline, but they wish they could run off on some rabbit trails. Of course, they're free to do that, but then they become hybrids between outliners and pantsers. But that's how you tell. It's just whether you're ready to write and can't wait. That means you're a pantser. If you just feel like you can't start your book until you've got it all mapped out, you're probably an outliner.
That's a great question. So many more great questions are coming in. Let's keep rolling. Gertrude, here's yours for Jerry. Thanks for this opportunity, Jerry. How do you create brilliant characters, especially when you're stuck with creativity?
I'm a little concerned about that phrase, stuck with creativity. If you're not creative, you may not be a creative writer, obviously. Most creatives that I know, especially most novelists, have more ideas and more character ideas than they can use in a lifetime. People often say, oh, I've got an idea for you. I don't need your ideas. That's why I'm a novelist. I want to write my own. I don't have enough years left in my life to write all the novels I'd love to write. As far as characters, I'll give you a quick example. I used to work in an office in Chicago, and I was writing on the side, and people knew me as a writer. And one day I got a message that a woman was waiting for me in the lobby and had a question for me. So I went down to the lobby, and this woman came in, and she was really quite unique. I would say she was probably in her mid-60s. She had a scoliosis, had a severe hunchback. She was wearing a trench coat that reached the floor. She dragged one leg. She had one eye closed, and she had big glasses on. And she said, are you Jenkins, the writer? And I said, I am. And she said, I got a question for you. Where do you get your ideas for characters? Now, you can imagine I had to really keep from laughing. Now, I wasn't laughing at her. I have empathy for people that have issues like that. But imagine Where else would I get my characters but simply seeing people like her? Not that every character has to be unusual looking like that or unique, but they have to be distinct from each other. I find that most creatives are curious and they're observant. And so I listen to conversations in the mall. I listen to conversations. I watch people in church or at a restaurant. And I just sort of log that stuff away. I don't often take notes on it, but it just gets lodged in the back of my mind. And when I need a character, I see those people. So, if you're a creative, I would think you'd have trouble choosing from all the characters that might be dancing around in your head.
Jerry, let's keep going. Rapid fire here. Here's one from HH. Jerry, do you think there are enough readers out there for all of us wannabe writers? It seems like the demand is lower than the offer.
I don't think there's a shortage of people who want good books. I do think that because of this proliferation of self-publishing and the ease of publishing today, we're getting glutted. The market is glutted with books, but they aren't good. The market always wants good books, a story well told, something that will not only educate and entertain, but emotionally move you. Now, if you find a book like that, you'll read it. And we learn this from bestsellers. Books that sell in the millions of copies prove that there's lots of people out there who are looking for something they can get into, be immersed in, forget they're even turning pages, and then talk about it. What makes bestsellers is word of mouth, that tipping point where people start saying, have you read this book? You really need to. It's great. So, if it seems like there's too much competition, there is an awful lot of competition. Fortunately, there isn't a lot of competition among the really good writers who have something to say and can say it well. So if you study the craft, give yourself to it, and really work at it, there'll always be a market for good stuff.
Jerry, let's keep going here. Marco, this is another great question. Do you create your characters first, or do you create what the story is going to be about? What's your process, Jerry?
Yeah, it varies for me. Sometimes I get an idea for a character, but usually it comes with a theme. For instance, several years ago, I happen to be a person of faith. I read a lot of books in the inspirational market, and I got an idea. I wanted to study the theme of, is there any payoff this side of heaven for a life that's truly obedient to God? Anybody who's a person of faith or a Christian who goes to church has been challenged, in sermons to, you want to do what God wants you to do. You want to live for God. And many people try it. And I've been trying to do that my whole life. And sometimes you wonder, is there any reward for that? Not necessarily for works. I happen to be one who believes you don't earn your way to heaven. You get to heaven through the grace of God and for the work that Christ did on the cross. But is there any payoff this side of heaven for that life of true devotion? Because I have friends who are way more devoted than I am. They may be missionaries or evangelists, or they travel and they suffer all kinds of stuff. Whereas I've been lucky, I haven't had tragedy in my immediate family, and they have in theirs. And so that was the theme. I had the theme. Is there payoff this side of heaven for a life of true devotion to God? Then the character came to me. And I patterned the character after my grandmother and my mother, important women in my life. It happens that both of my grandmothers were born in 1900 and grew up with the 20th century. Now, I didn't use their stories necessarily, but I used locations where they lived and that type of thing. But I started with a young girl who was born in 1900 and grows up with that century. And as a young teenager, makes a decision. She's challenged in some meeting or some sermon she's heard to make her entire life an experiment in obedience to God. In other words, she's going to try to seek the mind of God and do whatever God wants her to do for the rest of her life and see what happens. And so she does this. And because I'm a pantser and as a process of discovery, I was as surprised and disappointed as many readers were to see all the things that came at her. She lost everything. Her mother died in childbirth. Her father died young. She inherited the home, but then lost it in some legal battle. She gets married. Her husband has an early form of Alzheimer's. They didn't even know what to call it then. She has children. She loses a house to a fire. She loses a son in a car accident. I mean, it's just all kinds of stuff. And I even had readers halfway through say, this thing better end well, or I'm going to throw this book across the room. But I teach writers, you need to pull all the support out from your character. Don't make it easy for them. Plunge them into terrible trouble and see what they do to get out of it. Everything they try to do to make it better makes it worse till it looks hopeless, but then what they've learned helps them win the day. Well, I'll just shorten it briefly. In the end, it's sort of a Mr. Holland's Opus type story, because in the end, in a birthday, an elderly birthday of hers, people come from all over the world to tell what she's meant to them as a Sunday school teacher, as a person who writes letters to missionaries. So in her case, there is payoff this side of heaven. That was made into a Hallmark movie, and I really enjoyed seeing that and seeing how they did it. But that's how my ideas come. Sometimes I get the theme like that one, and then the character. Sometimes I just think of a good character and say, what can I do with this person, and what kind of story can I tell?
Oh, Jerry, you just gave just a masterclass in that answer right there. We are recording this. I think this will be available for those of you who are taking notes and you couldn't write Jerry's answer down fast enough. This should be uploaded to YouTube a little bit later for you to revisit anytime. Welcome to the 30 or so of you who have just joined us recently. It's an AMA with Jerry Jenkins. Type your question into the chat, and we're going to keep getting to as many as this time window will allow. But that's it. That's all we're doing today. Jerry just wanted to jump on, answer some questions, be available. But Jerry, that last one made me want to ask one quick follow-up or clarification, really. You've never shied away from your faith. You continue to write in the inspirational market, but you teach the craft of writing to not to people that are maybe in your same belief or outside. What's your approach to that when it comes to teaching writers from different genres?
Yeah, sometimes people hear that I teach writers online at jerryjenkins.com, and they say, well, do you have to be a Christian or an evangelical, a believer, whatever? I think a lot of my constituency is that because they know me from the Left Behind series and from a lot of my books in the inspirational market. But that's not the platform where I, basically share my faith any more than I just did. I'm teaching writing, and that's for anybody who wants to do that. I respect people from all different walks of life and persuasions. And so, as you say, I don't apologize for my faith. It's a motivator for me for what I do. But I love to teach writing to anybody who wants to learn it, and you won't get beat over the head with messages or sermons from me.
Absolutely. All right, let's jump into some specific questions. I love these. This one comes in from N9. I won't read the rest of it because I don't know what you want to be called, N9, but here it is. I have a love interest in my story who plays a minor role as an average person, but later on becomes more important to the adventure. How do I execute this correctly without it being plot driven?
Well, I think you're on the right track by not wanting it to be plot driven, because sometimes when we just are trying to satisfy a plot, we make characters do things to fit that. And I sense that you know better than that. I like the idea of a person who's in a minor role as an average person. They should still be distinct. They should still stand out, and people should wonder, why is this person here? It's a minor role, and they're average, but they're here for a reason. And you just want to hint at that maybe they're really special to, and you say it's a love interest, so they're of special interest to someone. So you're watching to see how that develops. And then they become more important to the adventure. That's called character arc, and every character should have an arc. Obviously, the biggest character arc should be the protagonist, your hero. They're not necessarily the hero at the beginning of the story, but they are at the end. And often they start out as average people, but as Stephen King says, thrust into difficult circumstances. And then you write to find out what happens. So their character arc goes from average person at the beginning to hero in the end. This love interest can do the same, not necessarily at the same trajectory, because you want the emphasis to be on your main character, but they should grow too. And from what you've described, they will. They're a love interest, they're an average person, but they get involved. Maybe they're the sidekick or the lover of the main character. Sometimes people even do that with the antagonist, the villain. They need a character arc too, and it needs to be dramatic enough so that the protagonist can play off of them and become even more heroic. But it sounds like you're on the right track there.
Jerry, here's a question from Opal, and Opal's got some friends in the chat with us, so they're advocating for this question. Everybody wants to hear this one. Opal says, "Do you have any expert foreshadowing tips? Do you drop your foreshadowing hints more by intuition or your personal planning?"
I really think that they work best by intuition, because I've found sometimes when I'm reading a book and I'm aware of the foreshadowing, I'm thinking they planned this. Something's coming. They've made it over obvious. And frankly, uh, the irony for me is it was 27 years ago this week that the first Left Behind book was released. I find it hard to believe that much time has gone by. But the first book in that series obviously is the best-selling one of all the books I've ever done. I think it's in the 9 million range now. So it's hard to go back and critique that and say, there are things I wish I'd done differently. I always say I wrote the best book I knew how at the time. I can't beat myself up over not doing it the way I would do it today, because I know more today. But at that time, I felt it was the best I could do. But there is a very clunky bit of foreshadowing in the first chapter of that book. So would I do that differently today? I sure would. I try to be much more subtle about the foreshadowing. I didn't mean it to be foreshadowing. I was just trying to sort of set the story up. But for those of you who are familiar with it, and those of you who aren't, I'll just run it down briefly. But I start with my airline pilot. He's flying, to across the Atlantic, and he's thinking about pursuing an affair with a flight attendant, and he's married. And so he's thinking about his wife and his family. And he's saying, in his mind, that his wife has sort of become a religious nut. She's been talking about the end of the world and the rapture, the second coming of Christ and all that. And he's not buying it. He thinks she's kind of off her rocker and is kind of embarrassed by her. So he's trying to justify what he might do with this flight attendant. Well, by the end of that first chapter, the rapture happens. People disappear. Now, if that isn't clunky foreshadowing, I don't know what is. I do think it needed to be there in some format, but I probably would do it much more subtly now. But to answer your question, I do that by intuition and not by trying to plot that out. I think when you do that, it becomes over obvious, and you want to be careful of that.
Thanks for the question, Opal. Just a couple of shout outs here, Jerry. We've got Lucy joining us from England. And let's see, Blazing Swordsman, you're active here in the chat. K9 Hannibal says, thanks so much. A lot of young authors here in the room with us, Jerry. So just wanted to say hello to a lot of people. Brilliant, bro. You've been here and active as well. So welcome in to everybody. Glad that you're all a part of this live session. Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, that's great. And welcome to everybody. Let me add my welcome. It's wonderful to do this and to have everybody here. I should add one thing to that foreshadowing. I'm currently writing the third novel, the novel that accompanies the third season of The Chosen, my son's TV series, which has become quite a phenomenon. And I was aware of some foreshadowing I did in that, so I might speak to that. I'm covering the part now where Jesus preaches the Sermon on the Mount, and it's the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, et cetera, et cetera. And at the end of that, people have been there most of the day, and they're in the heat, and they're dispersing now, ready to go home. And I do have a character in there who mentions something about, and near the end of the sermon, he's thinking, if this doesn't wrap up soon, these people are going to be fainting from hunger and need something to eat. And I'm sure they want to get home. Well, this is not the feeding of the 5,000. This precedes that. But later in this season, we get to the feeding of the 5,000. So just him simply saying that is a sort of a gentle foreshadowing of what's to come later, because the people will stay all day and so long that Jesus believes he needs to feed them and does that miraculously. So that's a bit of foreshadowing that I think is a little more graceful than I did in Left Behind.
Great questions continue to roll in here, Jerry. Yancey, here's your question for Jerry. I'll put it up on the screen as well. How many characters is too many for a good story?
This is where I always urge writers to trust your gut. If it feels like too many characters to you while you're writing it, it's too many. Whatever you're feeling while you're writing your manuscript, your reader is going to feel 10 times over. If it bores you, they're going to be asleep. If you think it's falling flat, they're tossing the book across the room. If there's not enough happening, you can bet that they need more conflict in that book. I do think it's a serious mistake for writers to feel like they need to introduce everybody right up front. I've seen openings where we get to meet an entire family on the first page. We've got to keep track of the names of the brothers and the sisters and the mom and the dad and even the dog's name. If you need a program to keep track of the characters, readers get impatient. They want to just get a microcosm of who are we talking about? Who's the main character? What's their problem? What's happening here? And then if they have, you can mention that they have a big family. You don't need to introduce everybody right away. Maybe you can say, of the 7 siblings, only her sister so-and-so was there, and they interact and they talk. And then maybe as people come home, they get described and introduced and they interact with the character. So as few characters as you can get away with, the better, so that the reader is crystal clear on who's who all the way.
Oh, here's one, Jerry. I'm going to limit you to, I don't know, maybe just a few minutes on this one. But William says, any tips for getting through the marathon of the middle? Start maybe, Jerry, with what is that, if somebody might not know or be familiar with that phrase.
Yeah, I don't think that's the marathon of the middle is original with me, but I talk about it a lot. A book, you roughly break a book into 4 parts. You've got your opener. That's the first quarter. The next half, that's 2 quarters, obviously, is the middle. And then you've got your ending. A lot of people have great ideas for an opener and great ideas for the ending, but they hit the wall when they get to that marathon of the middle. You can't just survive the marathon of the middle. You must thrive, because that's where you lose readers too. If you run out of steam, they run out of steam. So to keep them turning the pages, the best example I can give you as far as where to go for how to do this is binge watching television. The new binge-worthy shows, if they're ones you like, it's because they have setups and payoffs, and they have them all different lengths. You've got a setup that starts in the first episode that's paid off in the last episode of that season. Then you've got a setup that starts at the beginning of the show and is paid off by the end of that show. Then you've got ones that are set up and then paid off at the end before a commercial. So if you've got these setups and payoffs, keep setting up, which keeps people turning the pages. Don't make them wait too long. Pay them off, and then they'll stay with you for that long setup and payoff. That's as crucial in the middle as it is at the beginning and the end. As long as you keep having setups and payoffs, the readers will stay with you and keep turning the pages.
Tracy, this is another question that Jerry is qualified to answer more than most. I am struggling to find some important historical information. Any advice on how to go about doing historical research?
Well, I used to do this by hand, back when rainbows were black and white and I was starting my career. I would have to go to the library. I would have to have encyclopedias, atlases, and all of that stuff. All of that stuff is online now. So it should be easier than ever. The key, I think, is learning the correct way to Google or do a search engine type deal. You use the words that have to be there. For instance, you're talking about some important historical information. Maybe you're talking about, well, for instance, in my case, because I'm writing biblical fiction now, it's based on the Bible, but it's imagining stories that lead up to true stories. I need to know the manners and customs of Bible lands. If I need to know if I have a character that's going to walk from Bethlehem to Bethany, how long is that going to take? What would the temperature be? What would they wear? What would they take with them? How much water? Would they have to take food? What would their sandals look like? I Google all that stuff, and I find a book like Manners and Customs of Bible Lands and refer to that. I think nowadays I find that whenever I Google, if I use the right terminology, and that's always the challenge and the fun, you're winding up with millions of resources. The key then is to make sure that the resources you find are legitimate and that they cross-reference with other credible sources. Anybody can get on the internet and put their idea of what things were like in the first century in Jerusalem, say, but you want people that are really studied in this. Maybe they're seminary professors or they're teachers somewhere else, or they've written books on it. And a lot of these sources need to agree. And when they do, then you can be pretty confident that you've got good resources. The tough thing with research like that is it can be fun, and it can also be distracting. It can keep you from your writing. I can get lost in these reference books, but I also get new ideas from them. I'll read something about an article of clothing and think I could work that into the story. But at some point, you want to get back to the writing. And then when you get to a place where you need to know a detail, what would the door handle have looked like on this stable that this person is going into at this point? You just put an asterisk there, and when you get a half a dozen of those, then you can take a break and research some more and then get back to the writing.
Jerry, you up for more questions? I mean, we've been here for 35 minutes and they just keep coming in. Are you still good?
I'm good. Yeah. And I think since we started late, we can go a little longer.
Yeah, why not? And if you're enjoying this, let us know. If you want Jerry to keep answering some questions, let us know. Give us a thumbs up. If you're not already, go ahead and subscribe. That certainly helps out Jerry's channel a ton. But we want to continue offering some great advice from Jerry Jenkins here. So if you haven't done so yet, type your question. I'm trying to scroll through these and pick some great ones. And Morgan, you've been here with us for a while. Let's get to your question right now. Morgan says, great being here. I've got a big problem, though. I wrote a YA NA novel, which ended up being around 250,000 words, which is obviously too high of a word count. So the question here, Jerry, is what's your advice for cutting?
Well, no question you need to cut. It's interesting that YA novels are generally considered a little bit shorter than adult novels, except for the best-selling YA novels of all time. In fact, the best-selling novels anywhere. The Harry Potter series is YA by definition. And some of J.K. Rowling's novels are in the 180, 190,000 word range, which is way too long for a beginning writer for sure, and probably would preclude sales unless you can write like J.K. Rowling. Now, she has such a winning combination there that she can't lose. But as far as cutting, I would say you might want to, when you're that long, often people will say I'm at 125,000 words and my publisher wants 90,000 words. Then I say you go through and cut scene by scene. You can cut some scenes, but usually just by cutting within each sentence in each paragraph, you'd be amazed how much you can cut. If you've ever seen me do what I call my ferocious self-editing or manuscript repair and rewrite, I often teach. You can cut within sentences, and you'll cut out sometimes 25% of the story, and it's all still there as far as the meaning. But with that much, with 250,000 words, you want to look at maybe the second half becomes another book, or maybe even the second, the last third becomes another book, and see what needs to be where. Each book should be satisfying in itself. It should be self-contained, even though it might hint at something to come, so readers will come back for that next volume. But I would say, cut as much as you can just from the writing itself, just from word, sentence structure and that type of thing. But with 250,000 words, you're probably looking at 3 books there, and just see if you can turn that into a trilogy.
Let's keep going. Here's one from Shay. Shay says, what are the fiction books that you feel are excellent examples of the craft that all writers should read no matter the genre? Jerry, any novels come to your mind when you see that question?
Well, and this all depends on your taste too. Some of the novels that I really liked have some adult language in them. You got to have your big kid pants on when you read them. There are some that I wouldn't recommend for that very reason, but actually, I think Stephen King's The Green Mile is a wonderful example of a beautifully structured story, a fun read, and it's not one of his gory, demonic type things. It's got some supernatural stuff in it, and it's got some language in it, but it's really special. I thought Scott Turow's debut novel years ago called Presumed Innocent was really well done. It turned into a Harrison Ford movie. He's a lawyer out of Chicago, who writes in the John Grisham sort of genre, and that was a really special novel. So those 2 off the top of my head, and Grisham writes great novels too. If you like that kind of format. I think those are good. And then there's the classics. Don't pass up the classics, and Google those. The only drawback with some of the classics is that many of them were written more than 100 years ago, and that type of writing would not sell today. Some of them are written from an omniscient viewpoint, and usually today we're writing from third person limited or first person limited. Attention spans are shorter, so the books are shorter today, that type of thing. But there's an awful lot you can learn from the classics, Hemingway and those types of writers. So you caught me off guard there, but there's a few to get started with.
Yes, there's several people who are asking, is this still live? Yes, there's lots of questions that we were trying to get through. I'm not only going to most recent questions. I've scrolled back to the beginning and grabbed a few of those as well, but we are still live. Jerry's happy to answer your questions. So if you haven't submitted one yet, go ahead and take the opportunity to do that now. Jerry, let me mark this one and put it on the screen. Let's see. It's from OS. Why are agents so pretentious about literature if they themselves aren't artists? They criticize submissions harshly as if they understand the craft themselves. Jerry, over the course of your career, you've held every position on both sides. What would you say to somebody in this situation?
Yeah, I have not been an agent. That's one role I haven't played, but I've been an author, an editor, a publisher, ran a publishing house. I generally find agents not pretentious. Some can be, and the opposite side of this is if they're not criticizing submissions harshly, they're not critiquing them at all, and that's my pet peeve. In fact, I talk to agents and I say, in this age of technology, why do you say on your website, if you submit your manuscript to us, if you don't hear from us in 6 or 8 weeks, you can assume we're not interested? Isn't there, then we don't even know if you've received our manuscript. Isn't there someone who can push a button and say, thanks for your submission? If you don't hear from us now, then you can assume this. But they say that on their website as if they don't even acknowledge that they got it. So then let's say they acknowledge they got it and they're not interested. Can someone not push another button that says, thanks, it didn't meet a current need? Now, that's frustrating too, because they're not telling you what they didn't like. They're not helping you learn. That's not their job. But when they do that, they get criticisms like this saying, what do you know? Why are you critiquing me so harshly? So it's sort of like they can't win. I would say this, if an agent is successful, they do know what they're talking about. They've placed books with major publishers. They've made money. They've got clients. And if they say the stuff is bad, I wish they would be kind. I do this ferocious self-editing workshop where I take the first page of a writer's piece and I really tear it to shreds and put it back together. But I try to be kind with it. I'm not trying to be mean. And usually by the time they come to me, they've been rejected enough times without having any input that they're eager to say, please tell me what's wrong with it. Show me how I can fix it. And they appreciate that. But I would say, we need to give agents a little break. It sounds like you had a bad experience and somebody was unkind to you, and I would apologize on behalf of the industry for that. But I would hope that most agents wouldn't do that.
Jerry Wizard is here with us, and Wizard says, I need Jerry to be here for the next 12 hours because I have 677 questions. So no promises on that, Wizard, but we're going to keep going for now. Jerry, here's another common one that I think it's good for you to be able to speak into. Yamina says, do you have any suggestions on building a social media presence for budding authors?
I do. And partly because I'm here with David, who's my manager and in charge of my team, and they're experts in social media and that type of thing, have done well for me. But I'll tell you what I've learned, and I think it's really crucial. The biggest mistake, especially budding authors can make, is they start building the social media presence as writers. And I applaud the fact that you call yourself a writer, whether you've published or not. If you're working at it and studying it and writing, you're a writer. But what you're putting out on social media, if you're trying to show samples of your work, or if you're trying to talk about what you're hoping to do and you're going to sell books someday, that doesn't really benefit your readers, the people who are visiting your site or your social media presence there. You want to come up with something that benefits them to the point where they like you and come back to you. So what do I do on social media? You'll notice I'm not here selling books. I could. I've written plenty of books. I got plenty for sale. I could tell you we could have these in your home for just pennies a day. I could read you samples from them and show the covers and say, and you pretty soon get tired and saying, I didn't come here to get sold. I came here to learn something, to have my questions answered. So my area of expertise happens to be book writing and publishing. And so my social media presence is all about that, and it's to benefit you. So I'm answering your questions, I'm teaching writing, I'm doing that type of thing. And then when people hear I have a book coming out, which I do next week, a matter of fact, they might be interested. And that's great for me, but I'm not harping on that. I'm not selling. So if you haven't published yet and teaching writing isn't your thing, what would be your thing? Even though maybe you're writing a novel for kids, or you're writing a romance or whatever, that's not your area of expertise yet. It's not benefiting anybody yet till you get it published and sell it. So what do you know that could benefit your tribe? Maybe you know how to feed a family by couponing and save half the food budget every week by doing that. Maybe you know how to build a ship in a bottle and can talk about that and write blogs about it. And maybe you work on cars and can advise. Maybe you're a counselor, know how to raise kids, etc. Whatever benefits your tribe and has them keep coming back for more. If they benefit, you benefit in the end without trying to promote yourself as a writer.
Great question, Yamina. That advice is useful to so many who are here with us right now. So thanks for asking. Stephanie, here's a question that you asked to Jerry a minute ago. Stephanie says, I've recently had my novel assessed by a professional editor, and he said I needed more world building. How do I know if I have enough, and what should I be adding to add depth?
Well, needless to say, Stephanie, I would need more specifics to know what you're writing and what your genre is and the period and that type of thing. But I would say this. You could go online and just search for tips on world building for novelists. You'd be amazed at the resources there. And if you want to be specific, you could even Google Jerry Jenkins on world building. I just did a blog on this not long ago, and it's available. And we talk about all the various things you want to think about and do there. That's good input that you got. It sounds like if he wants to really experience the world you've set your characters in. And so if you can find those resources and season your book with those, it could really make it special.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to one from Fake Name here. Jerry, Fake Name, thanks for being here with us today. Do you believe the Western and neo-Western books are sellable now? I'm writing a neo-Western in the same vein of No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy.
Well, I'll tell you this: if you can emulate Cormac McCarthy, those books will sell. One of the things I'm careful about is never speaking in absolutes, especially about the market, because people say, oh, I've heard that these books are no longer selling. Nobody wants to read this anymore, or nobody's buying this anymore. Everything is selling if it's well done. I don't care if it seems like a genre from the 1940s. If it's well done, people want to read it. And people who there's a lot of people who like Western novels and neo-Western novels. And so I think the market is still there for that. And I wouldn't let anybody talk you out of it. I would be careful of trendy things. Sometimes, especially in nonfiction, people say, well, everybody's reading books now about how to dress for success or something like that. That may not be the same trend in 9 months or 2 years, depending on how long it takes you to get your book out. So if you're trying to follow a trend, be careful of that. You want evergreen stuff, themes that last. But Westerns, I think a good Western will always sell. So I'd say go for it.
Let's see. Dominic, you've asked a few questions here, and brilliant, bro. I'm searching for the right question from you as well. I know you've asked a few, but here's one from Dominic. Hey, Jerry, can I speak English and Spanish in my story? Because of the setting of my story takes place in Venezuela, where they speak Spanish. What's your thought on multiple languages in one book, Jerry?
Yeah, let me speak to that as a reader. and that'll show you how I kind of handle this when I'm using characters that might toss in a foreign phrase or something now and then. I love it when an author says, maybe quotes somebody in Spanish. Now, I'm not fluent in Spanish. I know a few words like most people do. But if somebody says a sentence in Spanish, I'm probably lost. I might be able to pick out one of the words and get an idea. But let's say somebody says a phrase in a foreign language, and we have no idea what it means. I like to see another character say, "Oh yeah, you think you've got all the time in the world for that, but I don't." So that's what the person said. They were saying, "We're not in a hurry. We've got time for that," because of the way that person reacted. So I think if you can do that, it adds some authenticity. If you know Spanish, you're writing the correct words in there. You're putting them in italics. People know somebody's speaking in a foreign language. It sounds accurate. It sounds true. But you don't want to frustrate the reader and have them go, "Oh, now I got to go to my computer and type this in and see what the translation is." Just have another character say in the language that we're reading in, "Oh, sure, you'd say that," and sort of repeat the point of it. I think that makes it really crystal clear, and that helps the reader.
Brilliant, bro. Here it is. Here's one of your questions. I know you've been waiting eagerly. So here it is. Jerry, I'm currently writing a book about a boy and two girls who go on an adventure. I'm writing it in the same style as the famous 5 books. Is this a good idea?
I have no idea. A boy and 2 girls who go on an adventure. I'm writing in the same style as the famous 5 books. Well, I feel like a dummy. What are the famous 5 books? If I knew that, I maybe could answer that. I hope it's a good idea. When you write it, send it. We'll take a peek.
Yeah, tell us more. Give us some more info, and Jerry will give you some feedback here. Oh, there's also a war going on. Brilliant, bro says. But we might need some more detail on that one. We'll see. Let's see. Let's go to another one though that says, this is from Revelin. What if the character had stuck with another character that speaks in another language? Should I write the other language or just explain what the character understands from that language? So I think kind of back to Dominic's question from a minute ago, Jerry.
Yeah, I think in that case, you establish the fact that your character is with somebody whose language they don't understand, or they don't understand it fully. But then don't do a lot of quoting of that character because the reader feels the same. We don't know what that character's saying, and so it's kind of frustrating. And I think you can synopsize some of that. Maybe she says something, and the other one says, I don't understand. Are you talking about?" Maybe she hears the word agua. She goes, "So you want water, or what are you saying about water?" So we get that she's catching on, and maybe the other one. And then instead of having her sort of ramble on in what looks to us like gibberish, just say that she does that. Say she tried to explain it, but I didn't get it, or the character didn't get it, and then talk about how they work through their communication problems. That can be interesting. How do they then? If she's stuck with somebody whose language she doesn't really know, and they're trying to communicate, how do they do it? Are they pointing at things and repeating words and that type of thing? That can be an interesting scene, I think.
And Jerry, we are the uneducated ones apparently, because the famous 5 is a series of books written by a British author called Enid Blyton, in which siblings and cousins solve mysteries with their dog. So I don't know if that comes to if that brings any comparisons to mind or gives you more context, but that is the famous 5. I thought there were 5 books written that were super famous that I'm supposed to know something about, but apparently it's the famous 5 book series that's being referred to. Let's go to a question from Brandon. I'm a traveling nurse writing a fantasy novel. How do I find beta readers once my draft is done? Most of my friends and family don't read novels, let alone fantasy novels.
I think that's another thing that you can do online. If you just put on Facebook or one of the other social media sites that you're looking for beta readers, and sometimes it's good to offer something and say, I would be happy to read your manuscript if you'll read mine. And then you'll get people who are not just readers, but they're also budding writers. And they might have some good insights to offer as beta readers. That's probably the best way I know.
All right, here we go. We're back. Brilliant Bro gave us some more information. A war has broken out across 2 countries. A boy lost his parents because of the war, but he has no time to mourn. So he sneaks aboard an enemy train and ends up in a small town. And the next text for more is still coming in. So, Jerry, does that give you anything to work from to start with? I'll put up more as soon as I get it.
That sounds like a premise. I mean, it's you always want to try to be able to distill your story idea into 1 or 2 sentences, and don't write it as back cover copy or advertising copy where it always poses questions. Will he succeed, or will she survive, or that type of thing? That's good for luring potential readers to read your book if it's on the cover of the book. But for the purpose that I think we're talking about here, say he has to keep up an act to not get discovered, bumps into 2 girls, the story goes on. You're still figuring out the rest. Break that down into 1 or 2 sentences and tell the agent, a potential agent, or a potential publisher, what happens. My very first novel ever, I'd written 18 or 19 nonfiction books. I wanted to write a novel. And my premise was, I want to write a novel about a judge who tries a man for a murder that the judge committed. Now, that either grabs the fancy of the editor and agent, or it doesn't. Fortunately for me, it grabbed a lot of people's interest, and I was able to place the book, and it did fairly well, and it started me on my fiction writing career. But that's all I told them. I didn't tell them a character name. I didn't tell them how this, what goes on, how it turns out, the whole thing. Today, I would probably write that a little differently. I would say, I would probably specify that the judge happens to be a woman, that her daughter knows the truth, and in the end, the mother is exposed, and so that the agent and the publishing house knows what's going to happen in this story. They just don't know how I'm going to get there, and so think that through as you do your premise, or what we refer to often as an elevator pitch. What you would tell a publishing executive if you got on an elevator and only had a few floors to tell them what your book is about.
Jerry, here's a question from the Keyblade theorist. I think it's missing 1 word, so I'm going to add an extra word in here. When writing my own books, how do I keep faith in the story and not get bored with the characters and the concept? Basically, how do I not give up?
That's something we all face. And the reason is we're writing and rewriting all the time. And so we're totally familiar with this story. And, I've often said that, I write, the first thing I do every writing day, I'm currently on deadline. So this morning, the first thing I did before I wrote my rough first draft, where I am in the story, is I did a heavy edit and rewrite of everything I wrote yesterday. Now, I do that with my perfectionist cap on. I want that to be perfect when I'm done, so that I'm happy with every word. And that catapults me into today's writing. But now it's time to take that perfectionist cap off, tell my inner critic to shut up, and just get the story down. I'm not worried about cliches, misspellings, repetition, anything like that. But I'm doing that every day. And sometimes early in a book, I'm on around page 50 now in my current project. Sometimes I'll go back to the very beginning to make sure everything is still, fitting and making sense and working in sequence. I've read that opener dozens of times already, and I could get bored with it. So I sometimes will just take it and show it to my wife, or show it to one of my sons, and they'll say, "Oh, I like this. This is good." It's fresh eyes on it. You're getting bored because you're so familiar with it. But on the other hand, trust your gut. If while you're writing it seems boring to you, it probably is. And what you need then is to inject more conflict. Conflict is the engine of fiction. If you've got happy people talking about happy things on the page, readers are like, well, that'd be a nice place to live, but it's boring. I often say my wife and I have been married over 50 years. We like each other, besides love each other. We love spending time together. We don't like to have tension. We don't argue about stuff. If we do, we clear the air quickly. Now, that's interesting, and that's a way to live. It doesn't make for a good novel. If I was writing about a married couple, I might have them sit down for breakfast and saying pleasant things about the food and the weather, and then have one of them blow up about something. Like, why did you say that? That offends me. And, and the reader's like, conflict is the engine of fiction. So if it feels boring to you, inject some conflict and see where it goes.
Jerry, we've been going for right at an hour. How are we feeling? Do we want to keep going for just a few more minutes? You got a few more questions in you?
I do. Let's go 5 more minutes.
All right, let's do it. More than enough questions to cover that, but maybe this is a sign that we should do this again at some point soon. We'll give you more details on that in just a little while, but let's get to Glenn's question now. Glenn says, I generally can come up with a premise for a story, but sometimes have trouble converting it into a plot, especially the ending of a plot. Any advice on converting a premise to a good concluding plot?
It could be, Glenn, that you're not an outliner, that you're a pantser, and you need to get those interesting characters in difficult situations and write to find out what happens. Of course, I don't know from your question whether you're saying I'm trying to plot this out and I don't know where to go with it. If that's the case, start writing it and see where the characters take you. That's what works for me. If you're writing it and you're getting to that point where you don't know where to go, you can play little games. It sounds a little silly, but ask your character, where do we go from here? What do you want to do? What's the problem? What if I said, what if I bring a surprise person into the room? How would you react? And let them tell you. So it's, I think it's a matter of seeing what your intuitions do. Sometimes we have an idea and it just isn't big enough for a book. It might be better for a short story. Think of a sort of a twist ending and make it shorter. See how that works. As far as how to take an idea and make it into a good ending, endings are important. Give the ending the time it deserves. I sometimes get up to, especially as a pantser, I get up right to the end and I want a big dramatic ending. I want to lean toward the one that's the most emotional. And I might just have to take a couple of days off, do some walking around, do some thinking, sometimes do some non-thinking, put it out of my mind, just let things come to me as they come. Because I don't want to shortchange that ending. It's crucial. So you're on the right track, at least to be thinking about that.
All right, Jerry. Here's one from Money Tree that a lot of folks have asked something in this vein during this session. Is it a good idea to try and write more than one book at a time? And this stems, Jerry, as you know, from a lot of people saying they have so many ideas. So, what are your thoughts when someone's up against that question of multiple projects?
Yeah, I confess I used to do this. It's been many years, but there were times when I had some pretty disparate projects, and they were totally different. I could be writing a children's fiction book in the morning and get my pages done, and then in the afternoon I'm writing a nonfiction marriage book or a family book, something like that. I couldn't do that today. I don't have that bandwidth in my brain and the ability to focus like that. So I don't recommend it. If you're young and have all kinds of energy, and maybe we're the age I was when I did that, it could work. But what I suggest, if you've got more ideas than you've got, time to write books, I think it's important to prioritize. Settle on that one project of all of your whole entire list that you're most passionate about, and that will keep bringing you back to the keyboard every day, and then commit to finishing that before you go on to any of the other ones. And I think you'll really be able to focus that way.
Jerry, this has been an amazing session. Normally, a lot of people, this is where they would give some kind of sales pitch, but that's not what we're doing today. You're just giving great answers to questions. That's really all we're doing. We've got one more. Can we do one more to wrap up?
Sure.
Is that okay? All right, let's get this one from Rose. Rose says, I desperately need advice on how to get over the fear of failure that becomes writer's block. Jerry, you've taught on this topic a lot. So what are your quick thoughts for Rose?
Rose, I know the feeling of getting up in the morning and wanting to do nothing less than try to put words on the page. That sounds like writer's block. But then I remind myself that writers are the only people in the world who can enjoy that conceit. Think of yourself in any other profession. I don't know what your day job is, but imagine calling your boss and saying, I can't come into work today. I have worker's block. They would laugh you off the phone and probably tell you, don't ever come in again. There's always something to do. And fear of failure is what, you're right. Fear of failure is what becomes writer's block. You don't have the luxury to not work. And so I would say embrace that fear. Say, I've got a reason to be afraid. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe the competition is too stiff. But make that, rather than paralyze you, motivate you to do your absolute best work and get your work out there. Sure, I still have a fear of failure. I send my books out. If I don't hear within the right number of hours or days from my agent or publisher, I think, oh boy, now they've finally discovered that I'm a fraud and I never should have been doing this. It's part of the game. Use it to motivate yourself to do your best work, get it out there and find out. And I wish you all the best with it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Jerry, I think we're going to wrap it up. I did say we're not going to sell anything. We're not going to do that. But if you're interested in more free material from Jerry Jenkins, there is a way for you to access another free session that Jerry's doing next week. It's actually happening next Monday. Next Monday is August the 22nd, and I just placed a link in the chat for anybody who's interested in attending. Now, Jerry, that one is specifically for novelists. You're teaching your history and thought on writing novels. Is that right?
Right, exactly. And I tell them what has worked for me over many decades and lots of novels.
Absolutely. So if you're interested in that, you want to join on a webinar where Jerry will teach the craft of writing novels, sign up on that link that was placed in the chat. Otherwise, stay tuned. We're going to do more of these in the future. It's clear that this was successful and that you joined us and got some great value from Jerry. So thanks for being here. If you haven't done so yet, click the thumbs up and subscribe to Jerry's channel. More great content coming from him soon. Jerry, anything else from you as we wrap up?
No, just a reminder that session next Monday is live and free, and I'd love to have you.
Live and free. Doesn't get much better than that. All right. Well, Jerry, thank you so much for your time. YouTube, thanks for being here with us, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone again very soon. Thanks.